All right, welcome everyone. Today we're doing a direct comparison, breaking down the military capabilities of two nations that are, well, on vastly different ends of the spectrum, the United States and Venezuela. We're going to dig into the numbers, the tech, and maybe most importantly, the factors you can't just find on a spreadsheet.
But before we just jump into a list of tanks and planes, let's take a step back and ask a bigger question. What does power even mean anymore? Is it just about having the biggest army? Or is the whole story a lot more complicated than that? Because in today's world, it's definitely not so simple.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll set the stage. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of manpower and money. After that, we'll look at the actual tools of war, the hardware. Then, we'll go beyond the battlefield to look at other factors, and finally, wrap it all up with the big strategic takeaway.
Okay, first things first, we have to get our heads around the idea that modern military strength isn't just a simple math problem. You can't just add up soldiers and jets and get a clear winner. The very nature of how conflicts are fought has changed. And this right here, this is a huge concept for our comparison: asymmetrical warfare. It's what happens when a smaller, less powerful side doesn't try to fight a bigger army on its own terms. Instead, they use unconventional tactics, things like guerrilla warfare, cyber attacks, even propaganda, to exploit the larger power's weaknesses. It's not about meeting force with force. It's about completely changing the rules of the game.
All right, let's get down to the hard data. We're going to look at the two most basic resources for any military force on the planet: the people who do the fighting and the money that pays for it all.
And wow, just look at these numbers. The difference in personnel is just massive. The U.S. has almost 1.4 million people on active duty, with another nearly 500,000 in reserve. Now compare that to Venezuela's force. Right off the bat, this huge gap in just sheer human numbers is a massive factor in any kind of traditional fight.
And if you thought the personnel numbers showed a big gap, the money is, well, it's a canyon. This chart does a great job of showing it, but honestly, it's not even close to scale. To give you some perspective, the U.S. military budget is about 9 times bigger than Venezuela's entire national GDP. That kind of financial difference affects literally everything, from buying new jets to basic training and keeping the lights on.
So what does all that money actually buy you? Well, it buys a staggering advantage in equipment and technology. Let's take a look at the actual hardware.
This table just lays out the stark reality in black and white. The U.S. has over 45 times more fighter jets, nearly 12 times more tanks, and of course a fleet of aircraft carriers that can project power anywhere in the world. This isn't just about having more stuff, it shows a completely different military philosophy. The U.S. is built for global reach, while Venezuela's military is set up for defending its own borders.
But here's the thing, even these crazy numbers don't paint the whole picture, not even close. The real gap, it's technological. We're talking about things like 5th-generation stealth fighters that are nearly invisible to radar, a global network of satellites for spying and communication, and some of the most advanced cyber warfare teams on Earth. It's not just a difference in numbers, it's a difference of generations in technology.
Okay, so we've looked at the things you can count, but what about the things you can't? These are the X factors, and often they can be the things that really decide how a conflict plays out.
This is where things get really interesting. For Venezuela, its geography, the dense jungles, the mountains, that's a huge home field advantage for a defender. On the flip side, the U.S. has this massive network of alliances like NATO, which means support and bases all over the world. And then you have these critical intangibles, things like the quality of training or the political will of a country to fight, which are impossible to measure but can absolutely make or break a military campaign.
It brings to mind that classic piece of wisdom from Sun Tzu. True military power isn't always about winning battles. Sometimes it's about using things like economic pressure, diplomacy, or just strategic positioning to get what you want without ever having to fire a shot. And that's a whole different kind of battlefield.
So, we've gone through the people, the money, the gear, and the intangibles. After looking at all of that, what's the big picture here? What's the final takeaway? It really boils down to this. It's a tale of two completely different kinds of power. On one hand, the United States has this absolutely overwhelming advantage in conventional, technological, and economic military strength. But that doesn't automatically mean the outcome of any conflict is a sure thing. Factors like geography, those asymmetrical tactics we talked about, and global politics make the whole strategic puzzle way more complex.
And all of this leaves us with a really big question, one that strategists and military planners are wrestling with right now. We've seen throughout history how smaller, determined forces can get larger, more advanced armies bogged down.
So the question is, in an age of drones, satellites, and stealth jets, how much does that home field advantage, knowing the terrain, having the will to defend it, how much does that still matter? That's really the core tension in modern warfare.